thought and looked around, and then he spied a woman of his approximate age sitting alone and looking rather lonesome. And a light bulb went off in his head. We'll get back to Sam in a minute. What we think when we hear the word temptation is selfish pleasure, indulgences of the flesh. Another drink, another candy, another romance. 3 of the 7 so-called deadly sins are bodily urges like gluttony and sloth and lust. The other 4 are just selfish things like pride, envy, greed, and wrath. Our culture has taught us, no matter our religion, that having selfish thoughts itself is sinful. Oh, I had a selfish and sinful thought. Conventional Christianity, at least, is focused on the individual mind. What's going on in that sinful soul of yours? Wanting to give in to its selfish urges. So we think of temptations as being like gooey desserts. Things we know we shouldn't have, but we see them and we start to feel our mouths water, or something else. But when we look hard, temptation is not generally about giving in to bodily urges or personal whims. Oddly, temptation turns up more often when we are trying to be good. Here's where I want to go. You remember Jesus. We just saw him coming in Jerusalem on a donkey. Well, at the beginning of his story, he gets baptized and the heavens open up and he hears a voice telling him, "You are my son," and I'm very happy with that. Talk about getting a good pat on your back. And then what does he do? He goes off into the wilderness to pray. And if you know your Bible, it was during that time that a certain adversary called Satan, the word Satan means adversary, came along and tempted Jesus to use his powers selfishly. Turn this stone into bread. Jump off the temple and be healed by the angels. I will give you the world and all of its power if you worship me. What's important here is to notice that none of these involved bodily urges. The devil did not offer Jesus dancing girls, didn't offer him palatial amounts of food, didn't give him time off to be lazy. No. The devil tempted Jesus with power. And he tempted him with his own power. In this respect, Jesus and Yertle the turtle are facing the same problem. They are tempted by their own power. The story by Dr. Seuss was written in 1958, and people thought instantly of Hitler and Stalin, but recent people have said, well, Yertle the turtle is like Saddam Hussein. It doesn't matter. We all see in this tale the grasping arrogance of those who have power and always want more. Power is very tempting, of course. We like being able to do things. But sometimes we forget it isn't just the sinful desire for power, but sometimes the innocent desire for power. Audrey, who was singing a few moments ago, sings a modest song of wanting to live in a place not even as nice as Levittown. Does anyone here get that joke besides me and people my age and older? That was the original tract housing on Long Island. Little cookie-cutter houses, tiny houses, but for people moving out from the city, it was the first chance to own their own place, to have that little spot that's green. And yes, there were plenty of them that had the slip-covered sofas and the TV dinners. We think of that as aiming too low, but for Audrey, who lives on Skid Row, it's as far as she can imagine ever going. It is a bold, wildly extravagant dream, but the point here is that Seymour wants to give it to her. That's the other character. You've heard him maybe in earlier weeks. And if you remember him from last week, he makes a bargain with the devil, in this case with a carnivorous plant, that promises him all the power he wants to give Audrey all that she wants. And the only price Seymour has to pay is to kill people for it. which he does. He does it for all the right reasons. Audrey should be delivered of her wicked boyfriend, Oren Scrivelli. She is a lovely young lady. Nobody ever feels more noble than when they're freeing the oppressed or serving the unfortunate. And yet, how many times in history have we found our Seymours bloodletting others so they could do good? My point, temptation enters most often when we compromise ourselves on the way to do good. The old ends justify the means. But I'm doing it for the best of intentions. And it makes sense when you think about it. We're most vulnerable to temptation, the temptation to use power, when we think we're using it for a good cause. Let's go back to Sam for a moment, see what he did. Thinking he could now get back into heaven, Sam is whistling a merry tune as the sun dawns and he straightens his necktie. He straightens himself up for the final trip, and the woman rouses herself from slumber, and her words send a shiver of fear down his back. Sam, I was on the verge of suicide last night. What a blessing you have done for me. Sometimes when we suit our bodily urges, we do good by accident. In other words, to be fed, to be loved, to relax. These aren't bad. It's when we use ourselves, when we abuse others. It's not satisfying our appetites that's evil. It's satisfying them at the expense of someone else. Almost a century ago, the young Mohandas Gandhi wrote for a magazine called Young India, and he coined 7 new sins, sometimes called social sins. I want you to notice how different they are from the ones we customarily cite. Here they are: politics without principle, wealth without work. I'll let that one sink in. Pleasure without conscience, knowledge without character, commerce without morality, science without humanity, worship without sacrifice. All of them are about the consequences of actions if undertaken in a selfish way. We should all want to be active politically, but to what end? We should all wish to prosper by our work. We should all enjoy the pleasures the body affords, and to learn, to be able to conduct business, to accomplish great things. But if we do those things and rob others along the way, there is the sin. It is not serving our desires that is the sin. It's taking from others to serve ourselves, no matter what we're doing. So even when we do good, if we take something from others, their freedom, their dignity, their money, their humanity, even when we do good, we do harm. And good intentions are no excuse. Palm Sunday is regarded as a story of Jesus' power and glory. It's the only one he gets, after all. And yet, if you look carefully, the story is not about how great Jesus is, but how corrupt the world is. He rides in on a donkey, not a horse. He mocks the king. The people wave palms, which they should do for a king, but he's clearly not a king. He goes into the court to drive out the money changers, but they have every right to be there. He arrogantly calls it, "My house shall be a house of prayer," and yet it clearly is not his house. He overturns not only the tables of the temple, but the expectations of the world. Jesus, when you think about him, is a mess of contradictions. But we lose that over the years. We've lost the irony of his ministry and his message and settled into a rather comfortable piety that even we liberals tend to prefer. My mission since seminary days has been to re-roughen the smooth edges of Jesus. He's not nearly as alabaster white. His hair isn't nearly as brick clean. His smile isn't always as serene as I think we have been told.